have called for the New South Wales Premier to stand down a number of times over the last fortnight, namely over her relationship with Daryl Maguire. Do you believe that ICAC will find Gladys Berejiklian guilty of corrupt conduct?
Well, obviously the inquiry was around the conduct of Daryl Maguire, but it is up to ICAC whether it does find or does make another finding or a finding in regard to another individual. They don't have to just land on a finding of corruption. There is also under the Independent Commission Against Corruption Act, Section 11, which is around the duty that MPs like me, like Gladys Berejiklian, have to report corrupt conduct. And you don't have to know it's corrupt conduct, you can have a suspicion of it. And under that act also sits the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Now, there is, I believe, every reason to think that Gladys Berejiklian has breached that Ministerial Code of Conduct by not declaring a conflict of interest. So ICAC doesn't have to land just on corrupt conduct. There are other findings that it can make.
So, well, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? So if it doesn't land on that finding of corruption, but it does heavily criticise the Premier, should she stand down?
Oh, I believe she has no choice because if you're Premier and hold the highest office in New South Wales, your integrity has to be absolute. At the moment, there are so many questions arising from what she has known over the last 6 years and what she hasn't disclosed. And of course, the obligation she has to report what she knows. The critical date, Charlotte, is that July 2018, which is when Daryl Maguire appeared before that Canterbury Council ICAC inquiry. At that point, the Premier should have gone to ICAC and said, I know more, because she knew about the Commission, she knew about the developer deals, and she knew about Country Garden. And at that point, she should have disclosed to her colleagues that she was in a relationship with him, which she didn't. So she's sitting around the cabinet table having conversations about the Badgerys Creek deal, having conversations about what's happening in Western Sydney, and all the while Daryl Maguire is seeking to make $1.5 million to clear his debt so that they could get married.
Well, I guess a lot of it's quite a technical thing, that code of conduct, because the Premier has said that she had a close personal relationship with Maguire, and the Ministerial Code of Conduct stipulates that you have to declare an intimate personal relationship. There does seem to be some grey area there. Do you think that there needs to be reform on that Ministerial Code of Conduct?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it'll be interesting. I mean, Gladys Berejiklian has tried to, I've said use weasel words around that. The fact is that she told ICAC it was a relationship of no significant status. But then over that weekend, of course, we saw her say that she wanted to marry him and she was in love with him. Yeah. And during the week, you heard all that discussion around whether she did or didn't have, or whether he did or did not have a key to her house. So, yeah, that is the point of contention, you're right. And I think that out of this, there does need to be some greater clarification in the Ministerial Code of Conduct, which we can do as a parliament by just making an amendment, because it does sit under the ICAC legislation. So I think that's quite possible, because MPs shouldn't be able to, worm their way out of it, slide their way out of that. The fact is that she'd been in a relationship with him for 6 years. And she did have a responsibility to disclose that relationship. Yeah,
it's certainly that the technicalities surrounding that, it seems quite ambiguous to understand what exactly the status of their relationship was. Do you think that you might be getting a bit ahead of yourself here with demanding that she steps down? Do you think that it could be better to actually wait and see what ICAC finds?
No, because I think there are far too many questions here. Look, my argument has always been that the Premier and me as opposition leader have a responsibility to uphold the highest standards. And whichever way you look at this, the standards have been compromised. And if we accept this, then we accept an impossibly low standard of government. And if we accept this, then politics forever in New South Wales is diminished, and we can never go back to that. I mean, Barry O'Farrell resigned over a bottle of wine. The actions of this Premier are so much greater than that.
Yeah, a lot of comparisons have been drawn to that over the past few weeks, understandably. In a separate probe, it came to light yesterday in a parliamentary inquiry that senior staff of Premier Gladys Berejiklian shredded notes linked to millions of grants that were given to councils under the $250 million Stronger Communities Fund. The government maintains it's still done the right thing and it has the right process in place for that Stronger Communities grant, and that there was nothing untoward about how they decided which councils were getting it, though they were almost exclusively given to coalition-held seats. Do you think that that's a concern?
Yeah, this is why the Parliament has established this inquiry into grants in New South Wales, because the Parliament believes there are questions to answer. So this fund was set up initially, a $250 million fund, to help amalgamated councils get through that amalgamation policy that the government implemented. But what we found is that 95% of that $250 million fund actually went to coalition seats in the lead up to the last election. Now, the Parliament has enormous powers on this to compel papers to be produced. And there was emails that clearly showed from the Premier's office that the Premier had signed off on at least $100 million in those grants. Now, the Premier, the Leader of the House was required to produce that signed-off document, but the Leader of the House was thrown out during the week of the Legislative Council because he didn't produce that document. And so the Grand Inquiry yesterday found out that that document had in fact been shredded. So it had been deleted from the email, and then it had in fact been shredded, the paper copy. Now, I've been a minister, and you don't shred documents like that. So, I think that's just another question around what is going on in her office. And another piece of evidence that came out, Charlotte, which is relevant, is that the Premier's former Chief of Staff, Sarah Cruikshank, gave evidence. And she said that in that grant allocation, so the Premier also has a $2.5 million discretionary grant. Daryl Maguire, out of that, received $40,000, 6 grants totaling $40,000, which went directly to his electorate, which benefited him. And no one's questioning the validity or the worthwhileness of those grants. But the fact is, she should have disclosed the relationship in signing off those grants. And the former Chief of Staff declared that she didn't, and the former Chief of Staff declared that she believes she should have.
Yeah, and that is, I guess, that grey area that we're talking about again, that she's defining a relationship as something else. Whether or I think that will be interesting to see whether those reforms will be made, because I think that is important, and certainly going forward for future governments. It's been a wild few months for the New South Wales government, and it is causing massive issues for the government. There is no doubt about that. And you've said multiple times that this isn't a popularity contest, but there is no doubt that Gladys Berejiklian has the public support in spades from her Liberal Party colleagues. Who do you think would have done a better job leading New South Wales through the bushfires and the COVID recovery? Because that's essentially what we're looking at, an alternative now.
Yeah, look, I can't land on, I can't comment on where the Liberal Party lands. I'm just... I'm really disappointed that there is not a greater effort by the Liberal Party to clean up New South Wales politics and make it the best it could be. I mean, I was elected by the members of the Labor Party on a platform of integrity and cleaning up our party, which has gone through really difficult times. I don't want to see anyone or any party go back to those really bad days of New South Wales politics. But if we accept this, then anything is possible in New South Wales, not just because she's a minister and a leader of a minister, but because she is the leader of the party and the Premier. And there has to be no grey in what she is required to do and not do. I mean, when I reported an issue to ICAC, Charlotte, and all I knew, I just had a feeling that things were wrong. I didn't know anyone who benefited. I didn't know how all the things I experienced were linked, but I knew I had a responsibility to do that, and I did that in 2011. And as I said, the ICAC Act is pretty clear. It's around a suspicion of misconduct, a suspicion of corruption. When Gladys Berejiklian, those phone calls we've heard were all before that July 2018 phone call where we knew that Daryl Maguire had behaved inappropriately. Now, ICAC, he had to resign, but all those conversations, we now know the Premier had a similar conversation with him. She knew about the deal, she knew about the commission, she knew about Country Garden, she knew he was trying to clear debts, she knew he was involved with developers. I mean, with the commission, she even congratulated him on that. So, the evidence is pretty obvious. And for me, I've said she's a hard worker. I said that I feel that she's gone through a relationship breakup, but she is the Premier of New South Wales and she has to set the highest standard.
Yes, and she does, and certainly ethically that needs to be transparent. But of course, we are the prospect now, if she does stand down over this and if this is the end of her career in politics, we will see one of her Liberal colleagues taking the reins as the Premier. And do you think that the state will be as receptive to a new leader? Given the situations that we are in amid a pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we are in a pandemic. We're coming out of a recession. We don't know if we'll go back into that. We don't know if we'll have another wave here in New South Wales. And I get that it's a time of uncertainty, but I've also given a guarantee that if there is a new leader, I will work constructively with them. I've actually always tried to do that with Gladys Berejiklian during the pandemic. I've praised her. Many people will know. I've come out and supported her. Where I have a difference of opinion, I've raised that. Where we have different ideas, I've raised that. But I've tried not to be an opposition for the sake of being an opposition, because people don't want that. But I just have to say, I cannot let this go, because it just takes us back to the bad old days. And I said to someone, I was in the lift with someone from the Liberal Party during the week, a really, respected minister, and I said to him, I still feel like I'm in a parallel universe, because I look across at her every day, Charlotte, when I ask her questions, and I've always seen a person who believes in integrity in politics. I've seen a really hard worker, and I've seen a decent person, but I don't know Gladys Berejiklian anymore. What has been uncovered is deeply concerning. And, I put this out on Twitter. I just said, I don't respect her anymore. I don't know the person I'm looking at. And that Liberal MP, that Liberal minister agreed with me. So there is uncertainty within the Liberal Party, but, I think there's a lot of discussion about who could and who would replace her. I think she'll never lead the Liberal Party to the next election. It's just a matter of time before she goes.
Well, I think it would be another interesting few weeks ahead for the Liberal Party in New South Wales. Jodi McKay, Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Charlotte.